Hello everyone. Today we're going to talk about the CTV building, whose collapse in 2011 caused more than 100 casualties. We will show that the accident was a consequence of several misbehaviors of some relevant stakeholders. And we want to discuss some relevant ethical implications, especially from the engineering aspect. We have divided this presentation into several parts. Firstly, we will introduce some basic background of the accident, followed by the analysis of the causes. After that, we will talk about the ethical implications. Finally, we will conclude that what we have done for this presentation. Now I am going to introduce some basic background of the accident. Firstly, I will quickly go through some basic information about the building. The CTV building was constructed during 1986, about 25 years before its collapse in 2011. The building code for the earthquake design have changed after the construction in New Zealand, and the design structure for this building was described as an obsolete design that existed before the 1980s. The structural design firm was Allen Ring Consultants, and the direct designer was David Harding. Both of them are the focus that we will elaborate later. Now let's move on to the day of the accident. The building was used as the headquarters of several companies before its collapse, which directly leads to its high costs. Institutions like the local television station and the English school for foreigners were destroyed during the collapse. The school was a majority costs, and many of them were foreigners. After the collapse, the Royal Commission of Inquiry conducting evaluation for the causes. The Commission's findings were released in 2012, and the report showed several causes of the collapse from different aspects. In the next part, we will discuss the causes of this accident. Now it's Chelsea's turn. Chelsea?
Thanks, Leo. After hearing the description of the accident, you guys may have a general idea about this case. And you may want to know, how can this terrible collapse happen? Now it's my turn to elucidate the causes. I divided the causes into three parts: the reasons of the designer, the reasons of the supervisor, and the reasons of the city council. Firstly, let's talk about the designer, David Harding, an inexperienced engineer. Harding had never participated in the designing of multi-story buildings more than 2 floors, but the CTV buildings have 5 floors. Although not qualified to do it at all, he still designed the building solely without any help from professional engineers. We can imagine how unreliable this design was. However, the horrible thing is the company just used the design without any modification. This is the second point I want to talk about. The company should be a supervisor and inspect the work David Harding did, but his boss Alan Ray trusted him completely. So there is nobody pointing out the deficiencies of the designing scheme and giving some helpful or life-saving suggestion. After all, the designing scheme was related to the stability and security of the building and therefore the livings of the people in the building. Now that the design was made by an inexperienced designer and no one had ever checked it, the reliability of the building needed to be suspect. Finally, I would like to talk about the city council. In fact, the ratification of constructing the CTV building was a fake. It is Alan Ray, the boss of the company, who pressured the council to approve the construction project, despite that some of the officials had reservations about the design. Nevertheless, the council still didn't reject the defective design but allowed it to be put into effect. That finally led to the unreliable building built up. There was another cause regarding the council. The CTV building survived the 2010 earthquake, which happened just several months before the 2011 earthquake. After that, some city officials evaluated the security of the CTV building. Unfortunately, the CTV building was regarded in good condition and they even gave it a green sticker. It is such a pity that the council didn't find the Cityway building was not reliable at all. If they could find anything wrong about the Cityway building, this collapse could have been avoided. After knowing the causes, now it's Eric's turn to talk about some important ethical issues. Eric?
Thank you, Chelsea. Previously, we have covered background information and the causes of this incident. Let's look at the 5 ethical issues that can be identified from engineering ethics. I am going to talk about 3 of them, including inexperienced engineers being one of the most important issues. First, I would like to tell you how inexperienced Harding was. He was the structural engineer from Mr. Ray's consultants. However, he did not have any experience in designing buildings with more than 2 floors, and he did not even familiar with the designing tools and modeling program. Furthermore, the developers demand a minimum cost design to just meet the code. This means that he could not add any extra reinforcement to strengthen the foundation. However, he did not tell the truth in his self-evaluation and Ray believed it. This resulted in this tragedy. He should not undertake a mission that is without his competence. According to Rule 2.1 of the WFEO Model of Code of Ethics and 4A2 of the New Zealand Code of Ethical Conduct. But what should he do? The safety of the building is of utmost importance, so he should seek a professional's help or just refuse the job. The engineering firm should conduct an assessment, which can help them evaluate whether the engineer has the capability on this task. Having examined the problem of the designer, let me discuss the dereliction of duty from the supervisor. Although Ray stated in the court that the building did not meet his own standard, he did not even look at the final plan. As the head of the structural firm and the supervisor, Ray did not pay attention to the process of designing the building. Instead, he gave Harding sole responsibility for handling something he had never done before. According to Rule 1.3 of Rule of Conduct of HKIE, Rule 2.1 and 2.3 of the WFEO Model Code of Ethics, and 4B2 of the New Zealand Code of Ethical Conduct. He should be mindful of the consequence if he requires a minimum cost design from an inexperienced engineer. He should check on the process frequently and regularly. If the engineer needs any help, he should provide any kinds of help. All problems mentioned between them show communication issues. It appeared that they did not communicate on their responsibility. Their behavior violated Rule 2.2 and 2.3 of the HKIE Rule of Conduct as they did not interchange their experience and information. Harding should seek advice from a senior when the task is out of his competence. This brings me to another important issue. He was discovered to force the Christchurch City Council to approve the design. The whole process of consenting, inspections, and the sign-off were handled by the City Council. After reviewing the structural design, the council staff found it hard to evaluate according to their own experience, since some unqualified elements were not obvious to find out. There were divisions in the design and construction process, as the elements of the applicable code were confusing. Several council members had reservations about issuing the building permit. However, Ray pressured them to approve it. According to Rule 2.4 of Rule of Conduct of HKIE and 1 of New Zealand Code of Ethical Conduct, he should not use any connection or interest to get approval. Instead, you should revise the design until it was a safe building to stay in. Now that I have reviewed three ethical issues, for the next part, I would like to introduce Chelsea to talk about Ray quitting his membership in an engineering institution.
Except for the inexperience of the designer, there is another ethical issue about him we need to talk. After the Royal Commission reviewed the reasons of the collapse, people found what the designer did, and the IPENS, which is short for the Institution of Professional Engineers New Zealand, prosecuted the designer, David Harding. However, David Harding just quit the membership of the IPENS. Under IPENS rules, complaints should be heard only about the members. Since he was no longer a member of IPENS, this means he could not be punished by the IPENS disciplinary committee. His resignation could show extreme lack of integrity and ethical behavior, and this also showed severe loopholes in the legal framework. He deserved the sanction as an apology to the victims in this collapse. David Harding should have conducted his duties with greater integrity and responsibility. As set out in Article 1.2 of WFEU and Article 1.1, 1.6 of HKIE, an engineer should be objective to accept his responsibility for his actions with integrity and fairness. But what David Harding did shows complete irresponsibility and dishonesty. Finally, Leo will explain the last some ethical issues and give us a conclusion. Leo?
Thanks Chelsea and Eric. Besides what they have mentioned, I want to discuss a little more details about the construction supervisor, Mr. Shirtcliffe's. His fake diploma is definitely a criminal behavior. And of course, this behavior violates most of the ethical codes, like the HKIE 1.1, which requires integrity, and WFEO 1.1, which requires no criminal practice. This is also mentioned in the local ethical code. Besides his criminal practice, his absence during the construction, which is mentioned in the committee report, can also break some ethical codes, like which is mentioned in the HKIE that do the job to his best. Now that we have analyzed the causes and some relevant ethical implications, let's summarize what we have talked today and give some suggestions about how people should do when they face such conditions. The collapse of the CTV building should be avoidable if all the related personnel behaved appropriately. If the designer Mr. Harding could realize his inexperience and limitation in this field and pointed out that at the beginning, or the manager Alan Ray could carefully assign the designing to an appropriate designer. At least, Alan should check the final plan, and he might find out the deficiencies in it. Even if the first line of defense did not work well, the other person still had the opportunity to point out the deficiencies in the designing plan. Actually, someone in the municipal council found out the deficiencies, but the LRA used his influence to help the designing plan to be passed, instead of modifying it. At this stage, nobody can prevent the tragedy. From this aspect, we can simply conclude that accident like this one is literally occasional, since people have so many opportunities to prevent it, but it will be actually inevitable if people do not behave appropriately. This is what we want to talk today. Thanks for your listening.